The Expedition of Humphry Clinker. By Tobias Smollett. To Sir Watkin Phillips, of Jesus College, Uxon. Hotwell, April 20th. Dear Knight, I now sit down to execute the threat in the tale of my last. The truth is, I am big with the secret, and long to be delivered. It relates to my guardian, who, you know, is at present our principal object in view. T'other day, I thought I had detected him in such a state of frailty, as would but ill become his years, and character. There is a decent sort of woman, not disagreeable in her person, that comes to the well, with a poor emaciated child, far gone in a consumption. I had caught my uncle's eyes several times directed to this person, with a very suspicious expression in them, and every time he saw himself observed, he hastily withdrew them, with evident marks of confusion. I resolved to watch him more narrowly, and saw him speaking to her privately in a corner of the walk. At length, going down to the well one day, I met her halfway up the hill to Clifton, and could not help suspecting she was going to our lodgings by appointment, as it was about 1 o'clock, the hour when my sister and I are generally at the pump room. This notion exciting my curiosity, I returned by a back way, and got, unperceived, into my own chamber, which is contiguous to my uncle's apartment. Sure enough, the woman was introduced but not into his bedchamber. He gave her audience in a parlor, so that I was obliged to shift my station to another room, where, however, there was a small chink in the partition, through which I could perceive what passed. My uncle, though a little lame, rose up when she came in, and setting a chair for her, desired she would sit down. Then he asked if she would take a dish of chocolate, which she declined, with much acknowledgment. After a short pause, he said, in a croaking tone of voice, which confounded me not a little, "Madam, I am truly concerned for your misfortunes, and if this trifle can be of any service to you, I beg you will accept it without ceremony." So saying, he put a bit of paper into her hand, which she, opening with great trepidation, exclaimed in an ecstasy, £20. "Oh, sir!" and sinking down upon a settee, fainted away, frightened at this fit, and, I suppose, afraid of calling for assistance, lest her situation should give rise to unfavorable conjectures. He ran about the room in distraction, making frightful grimaces, and, at length, had recollection enough to throw a little water in her face, by which application she was brought to herself, but, then her feeling took another turn. She shed a flood of tears, and cried aloud, "I know not who you are, but, sure, worthy sir, generous sir!" The distress of me and my poor dying child, oh! If the widow's prayers, if the orphan's tears of gratitude cannot avail, gracious Providence, blessings! Shower down eternal blessings. Here she was interrupted by my uncle, who muttered in a voice still more and more discordant, "For heaven's sake be quiet, madam, consider, the people of the house, Steeth. Can't you?" All this time she was struggling to throw herself on her knees, while he, seizing her by the wrists, endeavored to seat her upon the settee, saying, "Prithee, good, now, hold your tongue." At that instant, who should burst into the room but our Aunt Tabby? Of all antiquated maidens the most diabolically capricious, ever prying into other people's affairs, she had seen the woman enter, and followed her to the door, where she stood listening, but probably could hear nothing distinctly, except my uncle's last exclamation, at which she bounded into the parlor in a violent rage, that dyed the tip of her nose of a purple hue. "Fie upon you, Matt!" cried she, "what doings are these, to disgrace your own character, and disparage your family?" Then, snatching the bank note out of the stranger's hand, she went on, "How now, £20! Here is temptation with a witness! Good woman, go about your business. Brother, I know not which most to admire, your concupiscence, or your extravagance! Good God!" exclaimed the poor woman, "shall a worthy gentleman's character suffer for an action that does honor to humanity?" By this time, uncle's indignation was effectually roused. His face grew pale, his teeth chattered, and his eyes flashed. "Sister," cried he, in a voice like thunder, "I vow to God, your impertinence is exceedingly provoking." With these words, he took her by the hand, and, opening the door of communication, thrust her into the chamber where I stood, so affected by the scene, that the tears ran down my cheeks. Observing these marks of emotion, "I don't wonder," said she, "to see you concerned at the backslidings of so near a relation, a man of his years and infirmities. These are fine doings, truly. This is a rare example, set by a guardian, for the benefit of his pupils. Monstrous. Incongruous. Sophistical exclamation mark. I thought it was but an act of justice to set her to rights, and therefore explain the mystery. But she would not be undeceived. "What," said she, "would you go for to offer for to argufy me out of my senses? Didn't I hear him whispering to her to hold her tongue? Didn't I see her in tears? Didn't I see him struggling to throw her upon the couch? Zero. Filthy. Hideous. Abominable. Child, talk not to me of charity. Who gives £20 in charity? But you are a stripling, you know nothing of the world. Besides, charity begins at home. £20 would buy me a complete suit of flowered silk, trimmings and all. In short, I quitted the room, my contempt for her, and my respect for her brother, being increased in the same proportion. I have since been informed, that the person, whom my uncle so generously relieved, is the widow of an ensign, who has nothing to depend upon but the pension of £15 a year. The people of the Well House give her an excellent character. She lodges in a garret, and works very hard at plain work, to support her daughter, who is dying of a consumption. I must own, to my shame, I feel a strong inclination to follow my uncle's example, in relieving this poor widow, but, betwixt friends, I am afraid of being detected in a weakness, that might entail the ridicule of the company. Upon, dear Phillips, yours always, J. Melford. Direct your next to me at Bath, and remember me to all our To Dr. Lewis. Hotwell, April 20th. I understand your hint. There are mysteries in physic, as well as in religion, which we of the profane have no right to investigate. A man must not presume to use his reason, unless he has studied the categories, and can chop logic by mode and figure. Between friends, I think every man of tolerable parts ought, at my time of day, to be both physician and lawyer, as far as his own constitution and property are concerned. For my own part, I have had an hospital these 14 years within myself, and studied my own case with the most painful attention, consequently may be supposed to know something of the matter, although I have not taken regular courses of physiology etc. etc. In short, I have for some time been of opinion, no offense, dear doctor, that the sum of all your medical discoveries amounts to this, that the more you study the less you know. I have read all that has been written on the hot wells, and what I can collect from the whole, is, that the water contains nothing but a little salt, and calcareous earth, mixed in such inconsiderable proportion, as can have very little, if any, effect on the animal economy. This being the case, I think the man deserves to be fitted with a cap and bells, who for such a paltry advantage as this spring affords, sacrifices his precious time, which might be employed in taking more effectual remedies, and exposes himself to the dirt, the stench, the chilling blasts, and perpetual rains, that render this place to me intolerable. If these waters, from a small degree of astringency, are of some service in the diabetes, diarrhea, and night sweats, when the secretions are too much increased, must not they do harm in the same proportion, where the humors are obstructed, as in the asthma, scurvy, gout and dropsy? Now we talk of the dropsy, here is a strange fantastical oddity. One of your brethren, who harangues every day in the pump room, as if he was hired to give lectures, on all subjects whatsoever, I know not what to make of him. Sometimes he makes shrewd remarks, at other times he talks like the greatest simpleton in nature. He has read a great deal, but without method or judgment, and digested nothing. He believes everything he has read, especially if it has anything of the marvelous in it, and his conversation is a surprising hodgepodge of erudition and extravagance. He told me t'other day, with great confidence, that my case was dropsical, or, as he called it, leucophlegmatic, a sure sign that his want of experience is equal to his presumption, for, you know, there is nothing analogous to the dropsy in my disorder. I wish those impertinent fellows, with their rickety understandings, would keep their advice for those that ask it. Dropsy, indeed, sure I have not lived to the age of 55, and had such experience of my own disorder, and consulted you and other eminent physicians, so often, and so long, to be undeceived by such but, without all doubt, the man is mad, and, therefore, what he says is of no consequence. I had, yesterday, a visit from Higgins, who came hither under the terror of your threats, and brought me in a present a brace of hares, which he owned he took in my ground, and I could not persuade the fellow that he did wrong, or that I would ever prosecute him for poaching. I must desire you will wink hard at the practices of this rascallion, otherwise I shall be plagued with his presents, which cost me more than they are worth. If I could wonder at anything Fitzhugh undoes, I should be surprised at his assurance, in desiring you to solicit my vote for him at the next election for the county, for him, who opposed me, on the like occasion, with the most illiberal competition. You may tell him civilly, that I beg to be excused. Direct your next for me at Bath, whither I propose to remove tomorrow, not only on my own account, but for the sake of my niece, Liddy, who is like to relapse. The poor creature fell into a fit yesterday, while I was cheapening a pair of spectacles, with a Jew peddler. I am afraid there is something still lurking in that little heart of hers, which I hope a change of objects will remove. Let me know what you think of this half-witted doctor's impertinent, ridiculous, and absurd notion of my disorder. So far from being dropsical, I am as a lank in the belly as a greyhound, and, by measuring my ankle with a pack thread, I find the swelling subsides every day. From such doctors, good Lord deliver us! I have not yet taken any lodgings in Bath, because there we can be accommodated at a minute's warning, and I shall choose for myself. I need not say your directions for drinking and bathing will be agreeable to, dear Louis, yours ever, Matt. Bramble. P.S. I forgot to tell you, that, my right ankle pits, a symptom, as I take it, of its being edematous, not leucophlegmatic. To Miss Letty Willis, at Gloucester Hotwell, April 21. My dear Letty, I did not intend to trouble you again, till we should be settled at Bath, but having the occasion of Jarvis, I could not let it slip, especially as I have something extraordinary to communicate. Oh, my dear companion! What shall I tell you? For several days past there was a Jew-looking man, that plied at the Wells with a box of spectacles, and he always eyed me so earnestly, that I began to be very uneasy. At last, he came to our lodgings at Clifton, and lingered about the door, as if he wanted to speak to somebody. I was seized with an odd kind of fluttering, and begged Win to throw herself in his way, but the poor girl has weak nerves, and was afraid of his beard. My uncle, having occasion for new glasses, called him up stairs, and was trying a pair of spectacles, when the man, advancing to me, said in a whisper, "Oh gracious! What do you think he said? I am Wilson." His features struck me that very moment. It was Wilson, sure enough. But so disguised, that it would have been impossible to know him, if my heart had not assisted in the discovery. I was so surprised, and so frightened that I fainted away, but soon recovered, and found myself supported by him on the chair, while my uncle was running about the room, with the spectacles on his nose, calling for help. I had no opportunity to speak to him, but looks were sufficiently expressive. He was paid for his glasses, and went away. Then I told Win who he was, and sent her after him to the pump room, where she spoke to him, and begged him in my name to withdraw from the place, that he might not incur the suspicion of my uncle or my brother, if he did not want to see me die of terror and vexation. The poor youth declared, with tears in his eyes, that he had something extraordinary to communicate, and asked if she would deliver a letter to me, but this she absolutely refused, by my order. Finding her obstinate in her refusal, he desired she would tell me that he was no longer a player, but a gentleman, in which character he would very soon avow his passion for me, without fear of censure or reproach. Nay, he even discovered his name and family, which, to my great grief, the simple girl forgot, in the confusion occasioned by her being seen talking to him by my brother, who stopped her on the road, and asked what business she had with that rascally Jew. She pretended she was cheapening a stay-hook, but was thrown into such a quandary, that she forgot the most material part of the information, and when she came home, went into an hysteric fit of laughing. This transaction happened 3 days ago, during which he has not appeared, so that I suppose he has gone. Dear Letty, you see how fortune takes pleasure in persecuting your poor friend. If you should see him at Gloucester, or if you have seen him, and know his real name and family, pray keep me no longer in suspense, and yet, if he is under no obligation to keep himself longer concealed, and has a real affection for me, I should hope he will, in a little time, declare himself to my relations. Sure, if there is nothing unsuitable in the match, they won't be so cruel as to thwart my inclinations. Oh, what happiness would then be my portion! I can't help indulging the thought, and pleasing my fancy with such agreeable ideas, which after all, perhaps, will never be realized, but, why should I despair? Who knows what will happen? We set out for Bath tomorrow, and I am almost sorry for it, as I begin to be in love with solitude, and this is a charming romantic place. The air is so pure, the downs are so agreeable, the firs in full blossom, the ground enamelled with daisies, and primroses, and cowslips, all the trees bursting into leaves, and the hedges already clothed with their vernal livery, the mountains covered with flocks of sheep and tender bleating wanton lambkins playing, frisking, and skipping from side to side, the groves resound with the notes of blackbird, thrush, and linnet, and all night long sweet Philomel pours forth her ravishingly delightful song. Then, for variety, we go down to the nymph of Bristol Spring, where the company is assembled before dinner, so good-natured, so free, so easy, and there we drink the water so clear, so pure, so mild, so charmingly mawkish. There the fun is so cheerful and reviving, the weather so soft, the walk so agreeable, the prospect so amusing, and the ships and boats going up and down the river, close under the windows of the pump-room, afford such an enchanting variety of moving pictures, as require a much abler pen than mine to describe. To make this place a perfect paradise to me, nothing is wanting but an agreeable companion and sincere friend, such as my dear Miss Willis hath been, and I hope still will be, to her ever faithful Lydia Melford. Direct for me, still under cover, to win, and Jarvis will take care to convey it safe. To Sir Watkin Phillips, of Jesus College, Uxon, Bath, April 24. Dear Phillips, you have, indeed, reason to be surprised, that I should have concealed my correspondence with Miss Blackerby from you, to whom I disclosed all my other connections of that nature, but the truth is, I never dreamed of any such commerce, till your last informed me, that it had produced something which could not be much longer concealed. It is a lucky circumstance, however, that her reputation will not suffer any detriment, but rather derive advantage from the discovery, which will prove, at least, that it is not quite so rotten as most people imagined. For my own part, I declare to you, in all the sincerity of friendship, that, far from having any amorous intercourse with the object in question, I never had the least acquaintance with her person, but, if she is really in the condition you describe, I suspect Mansell to be at the bottom of the whole. His visits to that shrine were no secret, and this attachment, added to some good offices, which you know he has done me, since I left Alma Mater, give me a right to believe him capable of saddling me with this scandal, when my back was turned. Nevertheless, If my name can be of any service to him, he is welcome to make use of it, and if the woman should be abandoned enough to swear his banding to me, I must beg the favor of you to compound with the parish. I shall pay the penalty without repining, and you will be so good as to draw upon me immediately for the sum required. On this occasion, I act by the advice of my uncle, who says I shall have good luck if I pass through life without being obliged to make many more compositions of the same kind. The old gentleman told me last night, with great good humor, that betwixt the age of 20 and 40, he had been obliged to provide for 9 bastards, sworn to him by women whom he never saw. Mr. Bramble's character, which seems to interest you greatly, opens and improves upon me every day. His singularities afford a rich mine of entertainment, his understanding, so far as I can judge, is well cultivated, his observations on life are equally just, pertinent, and uncommon. He affects misanthropy, in order to conceal the sensibility of a heart, which is tender, even to a degree of weakness. This delicacy of feeling, or soreness of the mind, makes him timorous and fearful, but then he is afraid of nothing so much as of dishonor, and although he is exceedingly cautious of giving offense, he will fire at the least hint of insolence or ill-breeding. Respectable as he is, upon the whole, I can't help being sometimes diverted by his little distresses, which provoke him to let fly the shafts of his satire, keen and penetrating as the arrows of Teucer. Our aunt, Tabitha, acts upon him as a perpetual grindstone. She is, in all respects, a striking contrast to her brother, but I reserve her portrait for another occasion. 3 days ago we came hither from the Hot Well, and took possession of the first floor of a lodging-house, on the South Parade, a situation which my uncle chose, for its being near the Bath, and remote from the noise of carriages. He was scarce warm in the lodgings, when he called for his nightcap, his wide shoes, and flannel, and declared himself invested with a gout in his right foot, though, I believe it had as yet reached no farther than his imagination. It was not long before he had reason to repent his premature declaration, for our Aunt Tabitha found means to make such a clamor and confusion, before the flannels could be produced from the trunk, that one would have imagined the house was on fire. All this time, Uncle sat boiling with impatience, biting his fingers, throwing up his eyes, and muttering ejaculations. At length he burst into a kind of convulsive laugh, after which he hummed a song, and when the hurricane was over, exclaimed, "Blessed be God for all things." This, however, was but the beginning of his troubles. Mrs. Tabitha's favorite dog Chowder, having paid his compliments to a female turnspit of his own species, in the kitchen, involved himself in a quarrel with no fewer than 5 rivals, who set upon him at once, and drove him upstairs to the dining-room door, with hideous noise. There our aunt and her woman, taking arms in his defense, joined the concert, which became truly diabolical. This fray being with difficulty suppressed, by the intervention of our own footman and the cook-maid of the house, the squire had just opened his mouth, to expostulate with Tabby, when the town waits, in the passage below, struck up their music, if music it may be called, with such a sudden burst of sound, as made him start and stare, with marks of indignation and disquiet. He had recollection enough to send his servant with some money to silence those noisy intruders, and they were immediately dismissed, though not without some opposition on the part of Tabitha, who thought it but reasonable that he should have more music for his money. Scarce had he settled this knotty point, when a strange kind of thumping and bouncing was heard right overhead, in the second story, so loud and violent, as to shake the whole building. I own I was exceedingly provoked at this new alarm, and before my uncle had time to express himself on the subject, I ran upstairs, to see what was the matter. Finding the room door open, I entered without ceremony, and perceived an object, which I cannot now recollect without laughing to excess. It was a dancing master, with his scholar, in the act of teaching. The master was blind of one eye, and lame of one foot, and led about the room his pupil, who seemed to be about the age of 80, stooped mortally, was tall, raw-boned, hard-favored, with a woolen nightcap on his head, and he had stripped off his coat, that he might be more nimble in his motions. Finding himself intruded upon by a person he did not know, he forthwith girded himself with a long iron sword, and advancing to me, with a peremptory air, pronounced, in a true Hibernian accent, "Mr. What d'ye call 'em? By my sal and conscience, I am very glad to see you, if you are after coming in the way of friendship, and indeed now, I believe you are my friend sure enough, though I never had the honor to see your face before, my dear, for because you come like a friend, without any ceremony at all. I told him the nature of my visit would not admit of ceremony, that I was come to desire he would make less noise, as there was a sick gentleman below, whom he had no right to disturb with such preposterous doings. Why, look ye now, young gentleman, replied this original, perhaps, upon another occasion, I might chivalry request you to explain the meaning of that hard word, preposterous, but there's a time for all things, honey. So saying, he passed me with great agility, and, running downstairs, found our footman at the dining-room door, of whom he demanded admittance, to pay his respects to the stranger. As the fellow did not think proper to refuse the request of such a formidable figure, he was immediately introduced, and addressed himself to my uncle in these words: "Your humble servant, good sir, I'm not so preposterous, as your son calls it, but I know the rules of chivalry. I'm a poor knight of Ireland, my name is Sir Alec MacIlliget, of the county of Galway, being your fellow lodger, I'm come to pay my respects, and to welcome you to the South Parade, and to offer my best services to you, and your good lady, and your pretty daughter, and even, to the young gentleman your son, though he thinks me a preposterous fellow. You must know I am to have the honor to open a ball next door tomorrow with Lady Macmanus, and being rusted in my dancing, I was refreshing my memory with a little exercise, but if I had known there was a sick person below, by Christ, I would have sooner danced a hornpipe upon my own head, than walk the softest minuet over yours. My uncle, who was not a little startled at his first appearance, received his compliment with great complacency, insisted upon his being seated, thanked him for the honor of his visit, and reprimanded me for my abrupt expostulation with a gentleman of his rank and character. Thus tutored, I asked pardon of the knight, who, forthwith starting up, embraced me so close, that I could hardly breathe, and assured me, he loved me as his own soul. At length, recollecting his nightcap, he pulled it off in some confusion, and, with his bald pate uncovered, made 1,000 apologies to the ladies. As he retired, at that instant, the abbey bells began to ring so loud, that we could not hear one another speak, and this peal, as we afterwards learned, was for the honor of Mr. Bullock, an eminent cow-keeper of Tottenham, who had just arrived at Bath, to drink the waters for indigestion. Mr. Bramble had not time to make his remarks upon the agreeable nature of this serenade, before his ears were saluted with another concert that interested him more nearly. 2 negroes, belonging to a Creole gentleman, who lodged in the same house, taking their station at a window in the staircase, about 10 feet from our dining-room door, began to practice upon the French horn, and being in the very first rudiments of execution, produced such discordant sounds, as might have discomposed the organs of an ass. You may guess what effect they had upon the irritable nerves of uncle, who, with the most admirable expression of splenetic surprise in his countenance, sent his man to silence these dreadful blasts, and desire the musicians to practice in some other place, as they had no right to stand there and disturb all the lodgers in the house. Those sable performers, far from taking the hint, and withdrawing, treated the messenger with great insolence, bidding him carry his compliments to their master, Colonel Rigworm, who would give him a proper answer, and a good drubbing into the bargain. In the meantime they continued their noise, and even endeavored to make it more disagreeable, laughing between whiles, at the thoughts of being able to torment their betters with impunity. Our squire, incensed at the additional insult, immediately dispatched the servant, with his compliments to Colonel Rigworm, requesting that he would order his blacks to be quiet, as the noise they made was altogether intolerable. To this message, the Creole colonel replied, that his horns had a right to sound on a common staircase, that there they should play for his diversion, and that those who did not like the noise, might look for lodgings elsewhere. Mr. Bramble no sooner received this reply, than his eyes began to glisten, his face grew pale, and his teeth chattered. After a moment's pause, he slipped on his shoes, without speaking a word, or seeming to feel any further disturbance from the gout in his toes. Then snatching his cane, he opened the door and proceeded to the place where the black trumpeters were posted. There, without further hesitation, he began to belabor them both, and exerted himself with such astonishing vigor and agility, that both their heads and horns were broken in a twinkling, and they ran howling downstairs to their master's parlor door. The squire, following them halfway, called aloud, that the colonel might hear him, "Go, rascals, and tell your master what I have done. If he thinks himself injured, he knows where to come for satisfaction. As for you, this is but an earnest of what you shall receive, if ever you presume to blow a horn again here, while I stay in the house." So saying, he retired to his apartment, in expectation of hearing from the West Indian, but the colonel prudently declined any farther prosecution of the dispute. My sister Liddy was frightened into a fit, from which she was no sooner recovered, than Mrs. Tabitha began a lecture upon patience, which her brother interrupted with a most significant grin. "True, sister, God increase my patience and your discretion. I wonder," added he, "what sort of sonata we are to expect from this overture, in which the devil, that presides over horrid sounds, hath given us such variations of discord, the trampling of porters, the creaking and crashing of trunks, the snarling of curs, the scolding of women, the squeaking and squalling of fiddles and hautboys out of tune, the bouncing of the Irish baronet overhead, and the bursting, belching, and brattling of the French horns in the passage, not to mention the harmonious peal, that still thunders from the abbey steeple, succeeding one another without interruption, like the different parts of the same concert, have given me such an idea of what a poor invalid has to expect in this temple, dedicated to silence and repose, that I shall certainly shift my quarters tomorrow, and endeavour to effectuate my retreat before Sir Alec opens the ball with my Lady Macmanus, a conjunction that bodes me no good." This intimation was by no means agreeable to Mrs. Tabitha, whose ears were not quite so delicate as those of her brother. She said it would be great folly to move from such agreeable lodgings, the moment they were comfortably settled. She wondered he should be such an enemy to music and mirth. She heard no noise but of his own making. It was impossible to manage a family in dumb show. He might harp as long as he pleased upon her scolding, but she never scolded, except for his advantage, but he would never be satisfied, even though she should sweat blood and water in his service. I have a great notion that our aunt, who is now declining into the most desperate state of celibacy, had formed some design upon the heart of Sir Alec McIlligott, which she feared might be frustrated by our abrupt departure from these lodgings. Her brother, eyeing her askance, "Pardon me, sister," said he, "I should be a savage, indeed, were I insensible of my own felicity, in having such a mild, complacent, good-humoured, and considerate companion and housekeeper, but as I have got a weak head, and my sense of hearing is painfully acute, before I have recourse to plugs of wool and cotton, I'll try whether I can't find another lodging, where I shall have more quiet and less music." He accordingly dispatched his man upon this service, and next day he found a small house in Milsham Street, which he hires by the week. Here, at least, we enjoy convenience and quiet within doors, as much as Tabby's temper will allow, but the squire still complains of flying pains in the stomach and head, for which he bathes and drinks the waters. He is not so bad, however, but that he goes in person to the pump, the rooms, and the coffee houses, where he picks up continual food for ridicule and satire. If I can glean anything for your amusement, either from his observation or my own, you shall have it freely, though I am afraid it will poorly compensate the trouble of reading these tedious insipid letters of, dear Phillips, yours always. To Dr. Lewis. Bath, April 23. Dear Doctor, if I did not know that the exercise of your profession has habituated you to the hearing of complaints, I should make a conscience of troubling you with my correspondence, which may be truly called the Lamentations of Matthew Bramble. Yet I cannot help thinking I have some right to discharge the overflowings of my spleen upon you, whose province it is to remove those disorders that occasioned it, and let me tell you, it is no small alleviation of my grievances, that I have a sensible friend, to whom I can communicate my crusty humours, which, by retention, would grow intolerably acrimonious. You must know, I find nothing but disappointment at Bath, which is so altered, that I can scarce believe it is the same place that I frequented about 30 years ago. Methinks I hear you say, altered it is, without all doubt, but then it is altered for the better, a truth which, perhaps, you would own without hesitation, if you yourself was not altered for the worse. The reflection may, for aught I know, be just. The inconveniences which I overlooked in the high day of health, will naturally strike with exaggerated impression on the irritable nerves of an invalid, surprised by premature old age, and shattered with long suffering, but, I believe, you will not deny, that this place, which nature and providence seem to have intended as a resource from distemper and disquiet, is become the very centre of racket and dissipation. Instead of that peace, tranquillity, and case, so necessary to those who labour under bad health, weak nerves, and irregular spirits, here we have nothing but noise, tumult, and hurry, with the fatigue and slavery of maintaining a ceremonial, more stiff, formal, and oppressive, than the etiquette of a German elector. A national hospital it may be, but one would imagine that none but lunatics are admitted, and truly, I will give you leave to call me so, if I stay much longer at Bath. But I shall take another opportunity to explain my sentiments at greater length on this subject. I was impatient to see the boasted improvements in architecture, for which the upper parts of the town have been so much celebrated, and t'other day I made a circuit of all the new buildings. The square, though irregular, is, on the whole, pretty well laid out, spacious, open, and airy, and, in my opinion, by far the most wholesome and agreeable situation in Bath, especially the upper side of it, but the avenues to it are mean, dirty, dangerous, and indirect. Its communication with the baths is through the yard of an inn, where the poor trembling valetudinarian is carried in a chair, betwixt the heels of a double row of horses, wincing under the currycombs of grooms and postilions, over and above the hazard of being obstructed, or overturned by the carriages which are continually making their exit or their entrance. I suppose after some chairmen shall have been maimed, and a few lives lost by those accidents, the corporation will think, in earnest, about providing a more safe and commodious passage. The circus is a pretty bauble, contrived for show, and looks like Vespasian's amphitheatre turned outside in. If we consider it in point of magnificence, the great number of small doors belonging to the separate houses, the inconsiderable height of the different orders, the affected ornaments of the architrave, which are both childish and misplaced, and the areas projecting into the street, surrounded with iron rails, destroy a good part of its effect upon the eye, and, perhaps, we shall find it still more defective, if we view it in the light of convenience. The figure of each separate dwelling house, being the segment of a circle, must spoil the symmetry of the rooms, by contracting them towards the street windows, and leaving a larger sweep in the space behind. If, instead of the areas and iron rails, which seem to be of very little use, there had been a corridor with arcades all round, as, in Covent Garden, the appearance of the whole would have been more magnificent and striking. Those arcades would have afforded an agreeable covered walk, and sheltered the poor chairmen and their carriages from the rain, which is here almost perpetual. At present, the chairs stand soaking in the open street, from morning to night, till they become so many boxes of wet leather, for the benefit of the gouty and rheumatic, who are transported in them from place to place. Indeed, this is a shocking inconvenience that extends over the whole city, and, I am persuaded, it produces infinite mischief to the delicate and infirm. Even the close chairs, contrived for the sick, by standing in the open air, have their frieze linings impregnated like so many sponges, with the moisture of the atmosphere, and those cases of cold vapor must give a charming check to the perspiration of a patient, piping hot from the bath, with all his pores wide open. But, to return to the circus, it is inconvenient from its situation, at so great a distance from all the markets, baths, and places of public entertainment. The only entrance to it, through Gay Street, is so difficult, steep, and slippery, that in wet weather, it must be exceedingly dangerous, both for those that ride in carriages, and those that walk afoot, and when the street is covered with snow, as it was for 15 days successively this very winter, I don't see how any individual could go either up or down, without the most imminent hazard of broken bones. In blowing weather, I am told, most of the houses in this hill are smothered with smoke, forced down the chimneys, by the gusts of wind reverberated from the hill behind, which, I apprehend likewise, must render the atmosphere here more humid and unwholesome than it is in the square below, for the clouds, formed by the constant evaporation from the baths and rivers in the bottom, will, in their ascent this way, be first attracted and detained by the hill that rises close behind the circus, and load the air with a perpetual succession of vapors. This point, however, may be easily ascertained by means of an hygrometer, or a paper of salt of tartar exposed to the action of the atmosphere. The same artist who planned the circus, has likewise projected a crescent. When that is finished, we shall probably have a star, and those who are living 30 years hence, may, perhaps, see all the signs of the zodiac exhibited in architecture at Bath. These, however fantastical, are still designs that denote some ingenuity and knowledge in the architect, but the rage of building has laid hold on such a number of adventurers, that one sees new houses starting up in every outlet and every corner of Bath, contrived without judgment, executed without solidity, and stuck together, with so little regard to plan and propriety, that the different lines of the new rows and buildings interfere with, and intersect one another in every different angle of conjunction. They look like the wreck of streets and squares disjointed by an earthquake, which hath broken the ground into a variety of holes and hillocks, or as if some Gothic devil had stuffed them all together in a bag, and left them to stand higgledy-piggledy, just as chance directed. What sort of a monster Bath will become in a few years, with those growing excrescences, may be easily conceived, but the want of beauty and proportion is not the worst effect of these new mansions. They are built so slight, with the soft crumbling stone found in this neighborhood, that I shall never sleep quietly in one of them, when it blowed, as the sailors say, a capful of wind, and, I am persuaded, that my hind, Roger Williams, or any man of equal strength, would be able to push his foot through the strongest part of their walls, without any great exertion of his muscles. All these absurdities arise from the general tide of luxury, which hath overspread the nation, and swept away all, even the very dregs of the people. Every upstart of fortune, harnessed in the trappings of the mode, presents himself at Bath, as in the very focus of observation. Clerks and factors from the East Indies, loaded with the spoil of plundered provinces, planters, Negro drivers, and hucksters from our American plantations, enriched they know not how, agents, commissaries, and contractors, who have fattened, in 2 successive wars, on the blood of the nation, usurers, brokers, and jobbers of every kind, men of low birth, and no breeding, have found themselves suddenly translated into a state of affluence, unknown to former ages, and no wonder that their brains should be intoxicated with pride, vanity, and presumption. Knowing no other criterion of greatness, but the ostentation of wealth, they discharge their affluence without taste or conduct, through every channel of the most absurd extravagance, and all of them hurry to Bath, because here, without any further qualification, they can mingle with the princes and nobles of the land. Even the wives and daughters of low tradesmen, who, like shovel-nosed sharks, prey upon the blubber of those uncouth whales of fortune, are infected with the same rage of displaying their importance, and the slightest indisposition serves them for a pretext to insist upon being conveyed to Bath, where they may hobble country dances and cotillons among lordlings, squires, councillors, and clergy. These delicate creatures from Bedfordbury, Butcher Row, Crotchet Friars, and Botolph Lane, cannot breathe in the gross air of the lower town, or conform to the vulgar rules of a common lodging house. The husband, therefore, must provide an entire house, or elegant apartments in the new buildings. Such is the composition of what is called the fashionable company at Bath, where a very inconsiderable proportion of genteel people are lost in a mob of impudent plebeians, who have neither understanding nor judgment, nor the least idea of propriety and decorum, and seem to enjoy nothing so much as an opportunity of insulting their betters. Thus the number of people, and the number of houses, continue to increase, and this will ever be the case, till the streams that swell this irresistible torrent of folly and extravagance, shall either be exhausted, or turned into other channels, by incidents and events which I do not pretend to foresee. This, I own, is a subject on which I cannot write with any degree of patience, for the mob is a monster I never could abide, either in its head, tail, midriff, or members. I detest the whole of it, as a mass of ignorance, presumption, malice and brutality, and, in this term of reprobation, I include, without respect of rank, station, or quality, all those of both sexes, who affect its manners, and court its society. But I have written till my fingers are cramped, and my nausea begins to return. By your advice, I sent to London a few days ago, for ½ pound of gangs, though I doubt much whether that which comes from America is equally efficacious with what is brought from the East Indies. Some years ago a friend of mine paid 16 guineas for 2 ounces of it, and, in 6 months after, it was sold in the same shop for 5 shillings the pound. In short, we live in a vile world of fraud and sophistication, so that I know nothing of equal value with the genuine friendship of a sensible man, a rare jewel, which I cannot help thinking myself in possession of, while I repeat the old declaration, that I am, as usual, dear Lewis, your affectionate M. Bramble. After having been agitated in a short hurricane, on my first arrival, I have taken a small house in Milsham Street, where I am tolerably well lodged, for 5 guineas a week. I was yesterday at the pump room, and drank about a pint of water, which seems to agree with my stomach, and tomorrow morning I shall bathe, for the first time, so that in a few posts you may expect farther trouble. Meanwhile, I am glad to find that the inoculation has succeeded so well with poor Joyce, and that her face will be but little marked. If my friend Sir Thomas was a single man, I would not trust such a handsome wench in his family, but as I have recommended her, in a particular manner, to the protection of Lady G, who is one of the best women in the world, she may go thither without hesitation as soon as she is quite recovered and fit for service. Let her mother have money to provide her with necessaries, and she may ride behind her brother on bucks, but you must lay strong injunctions on Jack, to take particular care of the trusty old veteran, who has faithfully earned his present ease.